Lancet said the appendix had been peer-reviewed. It's one sort of peer admit, was it by Nick Luck and his pals tap dancing? Arc 1964 here. It's a video I never expected to make, but I feel I have no choice. On August 23rd, 2022, I looked at Waiting Post's website and noticed an article by Dan Wall of Regulus Partners, a strategic advisory business looking at a study published in the Lancet that month. For those who don't know, the Lancet is a major weekly medical journal. Who had analysed the report and come up with some very strong criticisms. Peter Thomas also had an article on the Waiting Post website expressing concerns. I read the first article I searched on Twitter for any mention, and Betting Gaming Council and their chief executive, Peter Duggar, were two of the few to mention it, bar some people just linking to it. Betting Gaming Council, say rather standards body, will regulate the UK betting gaming industry, excluding the National Lottery, which represent betting shops, casinos, online and bingo. We work with our members, large and small, to develop high ethical standards, create a culture of safer betting and gaming, and build public and institutional trust in our world-class industry. Other people say we're just a lobbyist group for the gambling industry. I'll leave it up to you to decide which is true. I was searching for their Twitter account as there were a few replies to their tweet I wanted to mention. However, I came across a tweet from them quoting a Sun newspaper article which mentions the Liberal Democrats while attacking the Lancet survey amongst other things newspapers are happy about. I keep my politics out of my horse racing videos. However, mentioned in at least one video used to be a local government councillor in Newcastle. I haven't mentioned this before, but it was for the Liberal Democrats. They've been a party member for 30 years and an activist for them for almost all that period. I was about to do this video attacking Lancet's survey, only to find that Betting Gaming Council, the trade body representing the gambling industry, have retweeted an article attacking the Liberal Democrats. Betting Gaming Council is a successor body to the Association of British Bookmakers and Remote Gambling Association. As stated in a previous video, the Association of British Bookmakers were the most incompetent pressure group I've come across. I take this opportunity to mention the betting and gambling industry have not helped themselves over the last 10 years. Said in previous videos, the bookmakers bet for bank over fixed odds betting terminals, and the introduction of substantially smaller maximum bets on them ended up with betting shops closing, and subsequently a negative effect on horse racing prize money. I always thought the Association of British Bookmakers handled this ridiculously and competently, and I was strongly in favour of legislation drastically dropping the maximum bets on those machines. I wrote on Twitter 2018 on my personal account. The bookmakers ruined themselves. As someone who likes the betting goes horse racing, I have no sympathy for the incompetent way in which they and the ridiculous Association of British Bookmakers have introduced these machines and become dependent on them themselves. Gambling reform and expected white paper discussed on the Nick Luck Daily podcast on June 28, 2022, where Luck talked to Neil Channing. Nick Luck mentioned some issues. Proposed independent ombudsman. Channing said a few in the industry were lobbying to give IBAS, who I'll explain a bit more later on, more power and funding, and he said a lot of the gambling reformers were not liking the sound of that, saying IBAS is a bookie-run operation. An independent ombudsman would be seen as a slight win for reformers. Ironically, IBAS himself proposed doing the expected new role after the interview came out on August 2nd. Then a proposed Premier League shirt logo ban for gambling companies. Channing said this was a no-brainer and would happen. Regarding the code in advertising and sports sponsorship, Channing was more sceptical, saying it was subjective. Who are the youth culture people who shouldn't be involved in gambling and advertising? Channing himself joking he likes to think himself as a youth culture person, but a lot of people see him as a fuddy-duddy. So that's obviously, as we're saying, it can be very, very subjective. The maximum stake sizes on online slot machines, proposed to bring them down with land-based sites. Channing expected that to be agreed by everybody. Of free bets, Channing made a point that some of the right of the Conservative Party like Ian Duncan Smith are keen on restrictions, while some of the left of the Labour Party are seeing it as an attack on working class, as buying and selling stocks and shares apparently seems fine. Channing stated moves to very strict financial checks have now fallen away. £100 a month ending at possibly £1,200 to £1,500 a month, and is also perhaps more likely to end up as a credit score check. The end of the white paper after the interview was delayed after Boris Johnson fell from power. The Gambling Commission themselves had a rough ride in recent years. Department of Culture, Media and Sport asked Malcolm Sheehan, QC, to examine regulation of the infamous Football Index. His report criticised both the Gambling Commission and the Financial Conduct Authority. Earlier in March 2019, the Gambling Commission had allowed BetBright to cancel anti-post bets when it was sold to 8888sport.com. At the time, I wrote the following by email to the Gambling Commission. I noticed that you are consulting on how to make certain gambling in the UK fairer and safer. Giving you pathetic inaction over to the situation involving BetBright is basically to listen to the charlatan Witchy and take everything he says at face value. I have no hope for betting and gambling regulation with the organisation in charge of it, whose the regulatory abilities of a chocolate fireguard. I wasn't affected by BetBright welching on the anti-post commitments. I was discussing how you felt to criticise any aspect of it. You should be closed down and a proper regulator take over. Channing said in the podcast I just mentioned, there's a fairly wide view in the industry. The Gambling Commission are useless and don't know anything about gambling. Anyway, move on to the survey and other comments on it. Christopher Snowdon is director of the Institute of Economic Affairs and has written an article in Spite attacking the proposals. I'm on Christopher Snowdon and the Institute of Economic Affairs side of this issue, and to be honest, I suspect that's the only time I'll agree with them both. However, his analysis is entirely correct about gambling in that article, and I'll link it on the other comments. The Lancet survey says we asked 77 experts from professional networks to recommend measures from the public health fields that might be applied to gambling. 10 experts replied with expertise in alcohol, tobacco, drugs, diet and obesity, and the communicable and non-communicable diseases. As Christopher Snowdon points out in his article, there's one word missing, and that's gambling. Literally, not a single one of their experts work in the field of gambling. The 67 out of 77 people who contact for research questions don't reply. Anyone with a functioning brain cell would abandon the research, or at least realise it was unrepresentative. 103 measures were identified by those who have no obvious knowledge of gambling. I was doing my BA in Business Studies back in the early 90s. One of my essays was criticised for being a stream of consciousness lacking actual hard research. Frankly, that was a fair comment. And the Lancet survey recommendations read like the same stream of consciousness. More prosaically, it's like researchers got overexcited at the all-you-can-eat buffet. Lancet's study identified 86 experts before screening them down to 62 to invite them to become panel members. The study doesn't say what screening was used to lose about a quarter. Of the 62, 12 didn't reply. Of the 62, 12 didn't reply, 8 declined, 2 did not declare their interest, and 2 withdrew because of other commitments. We're now down to 38, and 3 disappeared later, leaving 35. That is better than 10 out of 77 that had before, but there are still issues. The authors in Independence give the characteristics of the members. 6 were even from the UK, with 2 from New Zealand and 1 each from Australia, Canada, France and Germany. My knowledge of betting and gambling outside the UK and Ireland isn't great, so I wonder what knowledge of these 6 non-UK people have of betting and gambling here. 20 of the 35 were academics, 6 worked in either local or national public health policy, 3 were clinical practitioners, and 1 worked in service management. At least 5 of them who have 3 lived experience direct and 2 lived experience affected other. These came from a lived experience forum on gambling harms. Problem is that these 5 people are hardly going to be objective. An Lancet study said we instructed a panel to reflect on knowledge of gambling and to rank each measure for effectiveness in reducing gambling related harms by selecting one number on the following 9-point scale. This is a key problem. The study solely addressed the harm side of gambling, which treated solely as a public health issue. The study says we removed the acceptability effectiveness criteria from an analysis. A public and political acceptability dimension fell outside the scope of the study because of major and dynamic issues that require separate investigation. Were to arise, acceptability is critical, so that should have been considered from the start, or else you're wasting everyone's time. The study states we identified 40 universal targeted measures to tackle harm from gambling. Now they came up with 40 measures to target gambling, which is the result of a entire piece of work, even that is not what was intended. The study continues with in the last 5 years it has been widely recognised that health, social and economic harms are experienced by a relatively large population of gamblers, their families, those in their social network and those in their community. It appears that it's related to the UK until I looked at the reference for this, which is conceptual framework of harmful gambling and international collaboration. This piece of work makes no specific mention of the UK, but 12 authors aren't from the UK, with one having organised gambling studies in the UK. The author of this specific study thanked 2 UK academics for reviewing their framework. That hardly ties in a sentence which would be assumed to be from the UK. Lancet authors then say calls for a public health approach to tackle harmful gambling were first made in the late 1990s in a study about North America. I'm not stating the UK can't learn from other countries, but surely a study should make clear where the research is coming from. They do give a second link, which is from the UK. The authors say some gambling stakeholders may dispute the need for or effectiveness of the various measures identified in this consensus study, or indeed the betting public. To continue, therefore the standard for implementation should be set according to best available evidence. I hope this happens in a future study produced by academics who are actually capable of doing the job. In the same section they say cross-government and inter-agency approaches required on a national and regional scale to facilitate the implementation of the measures we propose. Yes, because that's because they are so bloody excessive. Again, they write, a far-reaching, well-resourced, coordinated public health approach is needed to protect vulnerable people, reduce exposure to gambling products, and provide help to those who experience harms associated with gambling. As the authors explain later, there is no real definition of vulnerable. Helping people harm associated with gambling is laudable, but too much of the study is basically reduce exposure to gambling products. I originally came up with 32 queries about the survey. I admit I made a mistake myself. I didn't see some of my queries were answered in the appendix, which said overlooked was in the report. However, after reading the appendix, as I'll say later, some of it actually made the study look even more poorly constructed and incompetent. Table 1 of the main report and Table 2 of the appendix are the questions asked, listed in 7 categories between A and G. The researchers then use a sorting mechanism in Table S5 of the appendix. The problem is that the questions are now sorted by percentage, which means that measure A2 in the survey, ban the use of credit as means of gambling, now appears as measure A4 in Table 5. Question A3 in the survey, duties gambling operators are liable for to rise each year above the rate of inflation, is now question A2 in Table 5. That's just 2 examples. The numbers in Table S5 are also used in Table S6, not opposed to measures being listed in more than one way, but using the letters A to G in 2 different ways is ridiculous. It makes it more difficult than it should be to use the figures in Tables S5 and S6 with the figures in Table S2 due to the order change. Furthermore, one of the issues is the questions Table 1 in the main report and Table 2 appendix are not necessarily worded the same. Considering the authors may want to have shortened down the text and the questions appearing in the report, there are occasions where they produced a serious difference. For example, a question, ban the provision of all forms of commercial gambling products in venues where young people or those identified as vulnerable to harm are likely to be present, which is in the appendix, became ban all gambling venues where young or vulnerable people are present. In the survey, the latter question could easily target on-course bookmakers at racecourses, either banning them or making all racecourses 18-year-old or over. It's not helped by the authors at no point in the study or appendix defining the word venue. Authors said the panel found 81 of the measures to rate to be effective at reducing gambling harm. Afterwards, they ranked the survey question by the likelihood of them being implemented, which is shown in Table 2 of the report. Setting this before the questions are asked would have been a good idea. They produced this ridiculous situation. The measure panel ranked the highest 103 questions, ban the use of credit as a means of gambling, was left off of 40 recommendations after found to have less than a 50% chance of being implemented. What an utter waste of a panel's time. I'll state later I'm not convinced this measure was necessary, but given the authors think that requirement for UK internet service providers to block unregulated gambling websites and being accessible by customers in the UK has a 17.5 higher chance of being implemented, so that isn't just gambling we know nothing about. A further issue is while Table 1 of the main report states that full text of the questions is stated in Table S2 in the appendix, Table S2 in the report doesn't state this. It means you just look at measures in Table 2, it isn't obvious that these weren't necessarily the exact questions asked. Table 2 doesn't have either of the sets of numbers within sections A to G, which makes matters worse. The example I found of instance of exact quotes in the survey being quoted either from the report or the appendix belong to a consultancy dealing with various gambling and regulatory issues. They quote results from Table 2, not Table S2, meaning they're quoting the wrong results. The authors then compiled a literature search for implementation of the suggestions, which found as evidence for 11 of its 81 measures. This is crazy. Speaking of the qualified librarian with an MA in Information and Library Management, so we're supposed to do a literature search beforehand. A number of suggestions include some of the 40 final recommendations already exist to a greater or lesser extent. We also would have found out if they'd done basic research before asking the panel to rank them. A further issue is that it only deals with health policy in England. Of course, some of the measures can be implemented solely in England. However, the number of online ones are going to be incredibly difficult to implement just in England and not the rest of the UK. So, indeed, some of their suggested measures mention affecting the entire UK, while at the same time the report talks about measures being new to England. I'll start by going through the 40 measures authors suggested in the order they're asked in Table S2 through the appendix. when I go through the other 63 questions in the same way. I appreciate the authors haven't suggested these 63 measures, but some of the questions were ridiculous. I won't mention all the 103 questions, just the ones I can feel I can comment about. I use the letters and numbers from table S2 in the appendix. A1. Ban gambling operators' ability to claim tax deductions on the cost of advertising, marketing and sponsorship activities. A3. Duties gambling operators are liable for to rise each year above the rate of inflation. A10. Is gambling research, education and treatment funded from the general taxation revenue? There's two recommendations show one of the issues of the entire survey. They have nothing to do with gambling harm. They just aim to target with gambling companies per se. You can argue that money for A10 can come from A1 and A3. The problem is that A10 doesn't say that. It should have that as the aim. Well, that's all A1 and A3 is doing is targeting the companies. In fact, the report admits this by saying this about the measures in Section A. These measures seek to make gambling products less affordable and profitable for gambling operators. It's nothing to do with problem gambling, just gambling as a whole, and the better reports authors have been clear before all this started, this is what they wanted. A10 was accidentally analysed in round 3, having reached consensus in round 2 because the authors can't read data. B1. Ban in-play betting on sports events. The sole reason why this has been suggested is listed in the appendix. It says there's legislation in Australia which bans in-play betting on sporting events. This is a really bizarre reason to ban something just because it's banned in Australia, with a study giving no other justifications. What's even worse, the authors don't know that the Australian legislation doesn't cover horse racing, it just covers other sports betting. So the study is suggesting banning the very unpopular in-one betting in horse racing on the grounds that it's banned in Australia, which it isn't. Rather, placing a bet in play on other sports in Australia is allowable by phone and in person with a bookmaker. The truth is that the Australian legislation banning in-play betting comes from 2001 and is badly outdated, and the 2013 review recommended change of law to allow in-play betting in all sports. A further 2018 report to the effect of the ban when Australians were using unregulated offshore websites to place in-play bets. Also, main opposition to a change seems to come from operators like Tabcorp, offer in-person in-play betting in Australia and don't want to lose their monopoly. Again, it's clear that people behind this survey have literally no idea about the subject they're writing about. There's no justification for banning in-play on any event. It's an example of garbage in, garbage out, which is too prevalent in the study. B2. Ban spread betting on sports events. This is a really strange suggestion. Why would you ban spread betting on sports but not on the financial markets? I can't find a source for the percentage of spread betting done on sports events as opposed to the financial markets. However, Wikipedia states, by far the largest part of the official market in the UK concerns financial instruments. The leading spread betting companies make most of their revenue from financial markets, their sports operations being much less significant. A simple search of Google for spread betting shows the vast majority of search results are for spread betting on financial markets. Has the proposal to target solely sports spread betting even been suggested? The notes in the appendix quotes our Public Health England report stating 52% of at-risk gamblers participate in spread betting. This indeed appears in the report. The problem is the report does not state that this is spread betting on sports rather than spread betting on financial markets. I suspect the Lancet study authors had no idea whatsoever about spread betting and assumed it was to do mainly with sports betting. Reading this report in the appendix, I increasingly thought of this exchange from a film A Fish Called Wanda. Otto West: apes don't read philosophy. Wanda: yes they do, Otto, they just don't understand it. Now let me correct you on a couple of things, okay? Aristotle was not Belgian. The central message of Buddhism is not every man for himself, and the London Underground is not a political movement. Those are all mistakes, Otto. I looked them up. B4. Ban the display of scratch cards of lotto other points for sale. I'm not the greatest fan of these as they offer low odds of winning anything. But again, this seems a curious thing to want to do. What's really embarrassing for studies, there isn't a single justification in the main report or appendix for this. It's something someone has just added. B6. Found a legal definition of gambling to include loot boxes and all related new gambling style content in video games. Loot boxes is something I heard the name of but knew nothing about. Having looked it up, the government in July 2022 decided not to ban these after a 2-year review, which seems correct. However, treating it as gambling, as Lancet report suggests, does seem sensible, and the government could have taken stronger action. B7. Grant local authorities the power to restrict new operating licences based on the assessment of cumulative impact. The appendix mentions the Licensing Act 2003 alcohol. The problem is that I know from my time as local councillor, these powers for premises selling alcohol were really for specific areas in local authority which had issues with connected antisocial behaviour, often in night time. No one has said that betting shops do this. B12. Maximum limit of hours per day week where EGMs are in operation on land-based premises. And B13. Maximum limit of a number of all categories of electronic gaming machines, EGMs, in land-based venues. I have no idea how either of these will address problem gambling. All it would do is reduce gambling. Evidence applied for B12 was in Norway. Restrictions from 2007 ban electronic gaming machines between midnight and 6 a.m. There's a 3 to 4 hour nighttime ban in New South Wales, Australia. I'm not sure how much difference that would make. That's even the actual size of nighttime ban being in New South Wales, which is 6 hours, not 3 to 4 hours. In not unexpected news, the 6-hour limit is clearly stated in the report the authors give a link to. A very telling line in the report is, ultimately most overseas gamblers are happy for a shutdown to exist, but finding it does not impact them personally. B14. Maximum limit of a number of customers that can gamble on no operator's website at any one time. Only 2 proposals out of 103 suggested it, which the panel felt wouldn't be helpful. This is one of those 2 proposals the panel rejected, probably because it's quackers, so naturally the authors have just decided to completely ignore their panel and suggest this. How on earth would this proposal solve anything to do with problem gambling rather than just stopping gambling? It's ridiculous proposals like this that drown out a few sensible ones. Not only do authors not explain why they've added a question to a panel, but they don't explain why they've ignored the panel's answers. An example of how pointless and unprofessional the attack exercise was. B15. Requirement for banks and other payment operators in the UK to block payments to unregulated gambling operators. While Betting and Gambling Council have warned against unregulated operators, I'm not sure whether this proposal is sensible. There's a huge amount of regulation as a result of these proposals basically as a whole. The notes mention them being used in Norway, and producer web link doesn't work as it misses out a word, again showing how professional the whole work is. Having actually looked at that article, the country has an issue that in fact it's a state gambling monopoly, and one of the reasons customers are trying to find other operators is because that's in place. B16. Requirement UK Internet service providers to block unregulated gambling websites from being accessible by customers in the UK. This is wandering off into cloud cuckoo land. How to enforce it? Anyone VPN could just circumnavigate it. Also, at this point, the order of questions changes to less to the appendix and table 1 of the main report. B15 now appears as 16th question in the relevant section. B16 is now the 17th question, and B17 is now 15th question. Is it really too difficult to keep the same order in the report? C2. Ban the provision of all forms of commercial gambling products in venues where young people or those identified as vulnerable to harm are likely to be present. The appendix states UK Gambling Commission found that 84% of pubs were failing to prevent under 18s from using Category C gaming machines. Of course, there's a problem there. But as a former local government councillor, that's a licensing issue if the rules have been broken. It isn't reason to ban them entirely. 2018, Tracy Crouch, at that point Minister for Sport, stated it was a local authority enforcement issue when Maria Eagle asked a parliament question about similar machines. The appendix mentions that these machines are in place in places such as commercial clubs and pubs. Are these machines seriously going to be banned from clubs and pubs if those establishments don't ban children from possibly being there? Furthermore, as Margazota A. Karen writes, the UK Gambling Act 2005 follows the same pattern. Section 1 of the Act sets out overriding licensing aims under the of a statutory regime. The third objective directs the Gambling Commission to ensure that children and other vulnerable persons are protected from being harmed and or exploited by gambling. Have a definition of who those vulnerable persons are or may be, or how such harm may evidence itself is missing. Additionally, the National Audit Office wrote in February 2020 that's again the Gambling Commission, has also not articulated in detail how it interprets which consumers may be vulnerable and when. Later they wrote, vulnerability is difficult to define precisely as it can depend heavily on circumstances. Regulators typically recognise that vulnerable consumers are, due to the circumstances, particularly susceptible to harm. It also meant temporary vulnerabilities like a job loss or bereavement. Harrogate Borough Council writes in a gambling report, the Council is aware of the difficulty in defining with the term vulnerable person. The Gambling Commission states that the Commission does not seek to define vulnerable persons, but it does for regulatory purposes assume that this group includes people who gamble more than they want to, people who gamble beyond their means, and people who may not be able to make informed or balanced judgments about gambling due to, for example, mental health, a learning disability, or substance use, related drugs and alcohol. A substantial number of local authorities have copied this definition. Frankly, though, this definition is horribly vague and not very helpful to a gambling operator who could hardly know a customer had any of these issues. Similarly, there's a risk that on-course betting at racecourses could be targeted as families go racing with children. Probably the report appendix do not define a gambling product, so it could be betting. C6. Establishment by law of a public health licensing objective to prevent or reduce gambling harm. Gambling simply isn't a public health issue. The sole reference in wanting this is the New Zealand Gambling Act 2003. Simply someone from New Zealand has stated what happens in their country, and authors have decided to recommend it. The relevant section in the New Zealand Act is actually pretty short. A. Measures to promote public health by preventing and minimising harm from gambling, and B. Serves to treat and assist problem gamblers and their families, and wanu as a Maori word, and C. Independent scientific research associated with gambling, including, for example, longitudinal research on the social and economic impacts of gambling, particularly the impacts on different cultural groups, and D. Evaluation. So none of this is public health in terms of licensing. You obviously haven't read what the New Zealand Act says, as it doesn't mention licensing. C7. Mandatory age verification by official public data sources on all gambling websites prior to entry. What official public data sources? Appendix references Denmark and Italy as having these systems. However, Denmark already has a national electronic ID system, and leaving aside the civil liberties issues about the entire proposal, costs to be huge just to implement it for gambling. Italy already has an ID card system. The question word in the main report is mandatory age verification on all gambling websites before entry. It's difficult to achieve, but not as ridiculous as the actual question asked. C12. Set minimum age for all commercial gambling to 18 years with mandatory requirement of proof of age. The appendix mentioned national lottery age was raised to 18 years old last year. Also mentioned football pools have been 16 years old, which may be an outlier that needs addressing. And there's another problem. The main report lists this question worded differently as individuals must be aged at least 18 years to participate in all forms of gambling. The latter is very different, and the notes appendix state that 16 years old is also minimum age for local and society lotteries. Our 16 and 17 year olds are really going to be banned from these 100 clubs, and we need to provide ID in order to join one at an older age. Point is, why even mention them unless you think it's relevant? The notes also mentioned that the minimum age of gambling in Belgium, Jersey and Greece is 21 years. It surprised me, so I did some basic research. And again, it's shock news. The authors have got the law for Belgium and Jersey wrong. Amazing, and well done for this. They actually managed to get Greece right. Their reference for the legal ages is, wait for it, everybody's favourite source of information for academic studies, a webpage on www.onlinebetting.org.uk. Seriously, use a webpage with no references. I looked up the law for Belgium. A 21-year-old age limit is to enter casinos. Their legal betting age is 18 years old. It took some effort to work out why that betting page, though, for the legal gambling age in Jersey is 21 years old, as there's been no obvious difference from the UK laws. There's only one reference on the internet I could find that stated the gambling age was 21 years old for Jersey, and that was only for casinos with 18 years old being the betting age. That was in a blog written by someone called Simon, so I double checked the casino age online for Jersey. I was confused to find out there were no casinos allowed in Jersey. I'm a great fan of Sherlock Holmes, and one of my favourite Holmes quotes is, once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. There's one thing remaining, but I thought it was too improbable. Anyway, Simon's webpage had a link to an article saying, Jersey passes bill raising casino gambling age to 21 from 18. I clicked on it and it came up with a headline with exactly that title from 1983. From the New York Times. Simple Simon doesn't know the difference between Jersey and the Channel Islands and New Jersey, the state of eastern seaboard of the USA. Assume onlinebetting.org.uk has copied that from blog without checking on it, as no else does it say anything online about Jersey's age being 21 for casinos, and the authors have copied that because they're too incompetent to check what was claimed. But Wikipedia was also wrong on this, as they write Latvia's minimum gambling age is 21 years old. In reality it's 18 years old, but 21 years to enter casinos. Of course, the authors aren't suggesting making the gambling age a minimum of 21. The research is this incompetent to validate the entire survey. Aside, the relevant webpage authors used, now I'll put that in the comments, states the minimum gambling age in Malawi is 5 years old. That isn't a typo I've made. Clearly had to look that one up. Another minimum gambling age isn't 5 years old. The children of that age are allowed to casinos with their parents. How thick do you have to be as researchers not to realise that a webpage saying gambling's age is 5 years old might be unreliable? For the mandatory requirement of proof of age is required, what do you use? Millions of people in the UK don't have ID like driver licence or passport to prove their age. C13, Gambling Act 2005 to include explicit focus on preventing and reducing harm. appendix bizarrely states one of the objectives of Gambling Act 2005 is protecting children and other vulnerable persons from being harmed or exploited by gambling. They further state the New Zealand Gambling Act 2003 states its purpose to prevent and minimise harm from gambling, including problem gambling. So authors want to explicit focus on what they claim is already in the 2005 Act. D2. Ban all forms of gambling advertising and marketing across radio, television, online, social media and streaming platforms. The sole justification in the appendix stating Italy and Lithuania implemented total bans on all gambling advertisements. They left off the word off between bans and all. Appendix includes a link to an article about the situation in Lithuania. Hilariously, the second paragraph of that article states, while gambling advertising is still permitted. The Lancet said the appendix had been peer reviewed. It's one sort of pyramid. Was it by Nick Luck and his pals tap dancing? The authors are at least correct about Italy. Two cases I read about in Lithuania after the actual changes took place in that country. Meanwhile, Dissecting Casino was also found to have published promotional slogans on its cbet.lt website with the aim of advertising slot games to players in Lithuania and elsewhere. Baltic Bet was issued a fine for publishing similar advertising slogans on its OptiBet LT website, with this deemed to be encouraging people to gamble. People on the websites of companies prosecuted for advertising what is on the website, which is frankly laughable. Would these social media measures include banning women from having Facebook and Twitter accounts? D4. Ban all price and discount promotions on gambling products and services. Again with reference to Lithuania. However, it is best not to guaranteed a price promotion. Are price boots a price promotion? Are bonuses and multiple bets a price promotion? Notes in appendix mentions free bets and promotions, with multiple betting odds and free bets. Don't necessarily have an issue with free match bets when starting an account being banned. The problem is the authors don't necessarily have a subject and leave their suggestion open to interpretation. D5. Ban bet to view commercial arrangements in which the customers are required to open an account with a gambling operator or place a bet before they can watch an event. Does this include betting £1 to watch an event on a betting site for example you don't have a premium subscription? How does this tie with the equity the survey mentions? Astonishing, the studies in appendix states UK Gambling Commission has spoken to customers about why they'd chosen an account with a gambling operator and bet per view of the customers must register with a gambling operator to gain access to view the streaming of the game was noted as the least important reason. So what on earth is the issue then? Why do you ban something which is completely irrelevant as to why customers open an account with a gambling company? I've never seen a website say you need to open an account and bet to see an event. I've seen mentioned when you click on a specific event when you got an account. Well, that seems much rarer, certainly for horse racing, where that usually shows it for free. Claire Murdoch, head of England's Mental Health Services in July 2020 and the House of Lords Select Committee in June 2020, both recommended ending bet per view. The government rejected that, and I think we're right to do so. No one is betting £500 in order to watch a sports event. There's a good reason it's only 50p or £1 to watch. D7. Ban gambling advertising and marketing when children view or are likely to view, i.e. TV programmes that attract children, family viewing under 18 age-related films. Assuming Advertising Standards Association's changes to gambling adverts announced in April 2020 taking effect by October will address this anyway. D14. Universal ban on all gambling, marketing, advertising and promotions. This is literally an insane thing to be consulting or never mind suggesting. Given the only stated certification is that it's law in Italy and Lithuania, and as earlier they repeat their mistake or situation in Lithuania, including the typo I mentioned earlier, as they simply copied and pasted the sentence across. Do the authors have any knowledge of marketing communications? For example, do they understand that banning all advertising has to include banning betting companies sponsoring horse races, which has been happening for nearly 60 years? Do you understand it will include on-course bookmakers being banned from having boards saying who they are? Have they ever been to a racecourse? E8. Ban max bet stroke credit buttons on EGMs which permit customers to choose a maximum number of lines and credits during play. I can't see a problem with banning that. 11. Gambling operators to provide anonymised customer spending on gambling and any other data required to assess harm to an independent data bank. Not quite sure how this would work, what data would be required, or what would happen to the data collected. E13. Mandate banks to provide anonymised customer data on gambling spending to an independent data bank. It's a very strange suggestion, and even odder than requesting the gambling operators do it. E17. Require all gambling operators to make customer winnings available to immediately prohibit the cancellation of draw request. First part seems fine, but prohibiting the cancellation of draw request is over the top. However, authors linked to a Gambling Commission document for February 2021 saying their consultation supported this measure, and it came into force later that year. The author's response to this is, however, this only applies to online gambling. Where are they expecting it to apply to apart from online gambling? E18 set a standardised minimum speed to play across all EGMs and online gambling products. Notes in the appendix state the Gambling Commission will bring this into force in October 2021. Now, I appreciate this was after a study was finished, but surely that makes including it in the 40 measures redundant. Or at least the study should have had a note to say this has been implemented. However, it's possible there are some products not covered by the Gambling Commission decision. E19, video games and any gambling conduct have a minimum 18 age restriction. Notice appendix mention loot boxes again, but without a definition of video games you have a problem. There's also an issue as only a later question, which isn't in their 40 recommendation, do it mention similar to gambling. Without the difference being made clear, downloadable horse racing games like started orders could be effective for below 18 years old. F2. Display health messaging on the risks and harms of gambling on all gambling products, applications, websites and promotional advertising materials. Every bookmaker has a safe for gambling link immediately viewable when opening the homepage, bar, ball sports and the tote. Both these bookmakers do have a link which is at the bottom of their homepage, and telling them to make it more visible would be a good idea. This contrasts to the casino websites not owned by a bookmaker, will all have a safer gambling message, where over half have it at the bottom of their homepage rather than obviously more visible. This needs sorting out. The exception is William Hill, who have a message visible near the top of their sports betting page at the bottom of their casino page. Making the safer gambling links more visible would be useful, but at some point you need to let people actually bet and gamble without large-scale harassment. F10. Require gambling operators to disseminate official health-related information on gambling-related harms. How will this be disseminated differently than happens now, given the risk of harassing the vast majority of punters and gamblers? G2 ban automatic or default options following a period of self-exclusion. Note the appendix state gambler say people are removed from databases when joining self-exclusion, and they're not automatically added back in when leaving. So what's the point of this suggestion? G3 established single motor operator self-exclusion scheme to help customers exclude themselves from accessing all gambling operators, gambling products, venues and websites. GamStop already has a mechanism where you can self-exclude from all British licensed gambling websites. It doesn't look like you only self-exclude from certain companies. Arcade and adult gaming centres have a self-exclusion policy. You must start by asking a person at a venue. To exclude from betting shops, you need to do it by phone. Bingo hall self-exclusion is handled in person or by phone. Well, it seems simpler just to have one operator doing all of this online. There's a problem. Betting shops, arcades and bingo halls relying on photos to recognise someone who lives in a local area who is self-excluded. This of course doesn't work for someone who is self-excluded but goes somewhere else to place a bet or gamble. Well, it may be better to offer an online version of self-exclusion process for everything. You can't have a situation where customers exclude themselves from everything, including in person. That is unenforceable unless you have ID needed to everyone who enters them. G6 offer free and accessible psychosocial interventions to people experiencing gambling or digital harms. G12 offer free and accessible online and mobile application-based psychosocial interventions for people experiencing gambling-related harm. Notes appendix make clear that GamCare already do these. So again, what's the point of the suggestion? Notes appendix state the group format cognitive behaviour therapy may be more affordable and efficient. It's a good job, but GamCare do this already. This line from former Prime Minister Howard Macmillan about the Liberal Party in 1961 comes to mind about the authors. As usual, the Liberals offer a mixture of sound and original ideas. Unfortunately, none of the sound ideas is original, and none of the original ideas is sound. G9 provides free and accessible mutual aid and peer support resources to help people experiencing gambling-related harm. I don't think the appendix mentioning religious and controversial Gamblers Anonymous and Gam-Anon is helpful. And I'll address the other questions from the study, of those did not form part of the 40 recommendations. I'm doing this because there are some major issues here as well. A2 banned the use of credit as a means of gambling. Did in my original queries attack lists of the use of credit cards had been banned since 11 months before the study's research even started. Correctly pointed out to me on Twitter that using credit cards and betting on credit aren't the same thing. I don't have a credit account. As much as anything, they mean you get a credit limit based on a credit check. I'm not convinced that banning credit accounts which aren't common will achieve anything, especially as they don't seem associated with problem gambling. A4 duty on gross profits made by online gambling operators, and A5 levy on all gambling operators' gross profits to fund gambling-related prevention, education, research and treatment. Personally, I can't see an issue depending on what level. However, Betting and Gaming Council ought to do this via their members, so really would there be any difference? A7 tax and rate proportionate to risk of harm, i.e. if a customer pays more tax on gambling products to be judged more harmful. A really vague question. How would harm be defined? A8 tax proportionate to the value of a wager, i.e. the absolute value of a tax increases the value of a wager, and A9, tax proportionate to the value of the winnings, i.e. the absolute value of a tax increases the value of the winnings. The off-course betting tax was really unpopular before it was removed in early 2002. The on-course betting tax was removed in 1987. Even 35 panel members doubted this would specifically affect problem gambling, obviously, because it would affect all gambling. 11. Require businesses, organisations and individuals in the receipt of gambling sponsorship to make a set contribution towards the funding of gambling-related prevention, education, research and treatment. This is a problem, a mismatch of possible measures that haven't been screened. Is this in addition to charging gambling operators and or general taxation? How exactly would organisations, especially individuals, do this unless there was a levy on gambling sponsorships? But then they wouldn't be contributing, as it would be the gambling operator, which would be the more efficient way of doing this. B3. Ban the ability to request or place bets on social media platforms. Never mind, it seems a bizarre thing to want to stop. How on earth would you enforce it? B8. Mandate breaks during gambling sessions determined by session time and or amount spent gambling. This sounds sensible but could be a complete mess. Is a punter going to be stopped from betting on a race meeting and maybe watching at home? Because by the last race they may have been online at a different betting site for over 3 hours, but yet they may not have placed that many bets. If someone places a bet of say £500 on a race, are they going to be stopped from betting on another race afterwards? B9. Maximum cap on the amount a customer can deposit across multiple gambling operators at any given time. Firstly, the only way you could enforce this is some sort of centralised coordinated database of every licensed bookmaker, casino operator. That would also have to have real-time access to deposits. The whole sounds unworkable. Also, what figure to use for a deposit cap? B10. Maximum limit on how much a customer can spend gambling at any one session. Also, later B19 established a maximum limit on how much a customer can spend on gambling during a defined period of time. Firstly, why have you got two questions asking the same thing, unless it means a weekly or monthly limit? A punter can already set limits on these sites. I wonder how JP McManus will cope, or indeed any professional punter. B11. Maximum limit on the floor space and occupied capacity of land-based gambling premises. Like B12 and B13 I mentioned earlier, which a study actually recommends, this measure will do nothing for problem gambling itself, discourages gambling. B17. A maximum limit on the total amount of time within a 24-hour period on which gambling websites can operate. To what limit? Would people be stopped from accessing betting sites in the late evening to place bets for racing the next day? I certainly do that myself, especially when going racing. It would now be impossible to bet on USA Racing due to the time difference. B18. Ban gambling on newly registered gambling accounts for an initial set period of time. I suppose it would sound sensible on the face of it. However, someone may open up an account because they see a bookmaker offering a better price on something. I've certainly done that with a bookmaker. However, under this rule, you'd be unable to bet on it. When again, if you never placed a bet online, you wouldn't understand that. C3. Ban VIP high value membership and any other gambling operator loyalty programs. Taking the first part could be acceptable, but it does have flaws. Randomly banning loyalty programs isn't sensible. C4. Establish an independent ombudsman service to settle disputes between customers and gambling operators. I've already mentioned this. Why would this work any differently from current IBAS, which deals with all forms of gambling? C5. Establish host liability on the licensed operator when they or their employees fail to prevent or intervene the customer experiencing gambling harm. It's a daft suggestion. You can't prevent harmful gambling any more than you can prevent murder or speeding. You could try to put measures in place to make it less likely. Really, the problem gambler is the person doing the gambling. Mind of this exchange in the Yes Prime Minister episode Party Games, where Home Secretary has been caught for drink driving. Jim Hacker, where on earth was the security man? And the happily, well, apparently he'd given him the slip. You know how cunning these drunks can be. In the end, there may be nothing operator can do to stop a compulsive gambler. C8. Require affordability and source of funds checks by gambling operators and customers who register for a new account. And C14. Require financial institutions to conduct affordability and source of funds checks for customers who register for new gambling accounts. There are already moves to bring reform in for everyone, which is proven an immensely unpopular move with people who actually place bets. This isn't required for any other purchase, so why should it be required for gambling? Rather than for certain people want bookmakers having to have access to people's finances. The latter possibility will force a bank to investigate how much you are spending on something. The authors have lost leave of their senses. Interestingly, the authors wrote both measures off due to issues over implementing them. C9. Require all operators to provide a mandatory pre-commitment system requiring customers to set limits of amount of time, money, bets or deposits per gambling session, with changes allowed only after a cooling off period. Like everyone, I suspect, reading this, I was thinking, what the hell does this mean? And looking up the phrase mandatory pre-commitment system, and found in gambling terms it's solely a phrase used in Australian gambling meaning deposit limits. Clearly, Australian panel member has suggested this, and because the authors don't have a clue, they just copied it without realising no one in the UK would know what they meant. I once read an excellent book by Australian academic Delphi Hudson on watching racehorses in the parade ring. In the book he kept using the word strappers. I quickly realised that was their equivalent of the British Irish term stable hand. Point being, if I then wrote something about this, I understand the subject enough not to use an Australian word for British audience. This is something the studies authors haven't done. Appendix mentions risk of possible unintended side effects, but people with gambling problems may set higher limits and then exceed these limits, thereby experiencing more financial harm. I don't think voluntary deposit limits are an issue, but compulsory ones certainly are. Also written, it would be impossible to immediately decrease your deposit limit, which again shows poor drafting. C10 require online gambling operators to offer free online gambling blocking software to customers. I support this, but of course what can be blocked can be unblocked by a compulsive gambler. This might be why the panel weren't convinced it would work compared to other measures. However, given the authors decided to recommend B14 maximum limit of amount of customers that can gamble on operators' websites at any one time, despite the panel writing it off, the whole thing seems random. D3. Ban all gambling involvement in public health, health promotion, education interventions, research and health conferences, including funding, sponsoring, organising and directing. Racing for Schools, a charity, runs education events for school stage at racing venues. One of their ambassadors is Sana Gill, and is the Director of Communications and Corporate Affairs at UK Toad Group. What sense is there into managing she steps down? And I bet they don't want anti-gambling advocates being involved though. The first important main report is substantially different: ban all gambling involvement in education and research. D6. Ban gambling advertising and marketing before 9 PM on television, live streaming and radio. This might sound a sensible idea until you realise you'd be banning gambling adverts doing ITV's racing coverage. It makes no sense. Even worse, banning adverts during a large percentage of operating hours of the racing TV and Sky Sports TV channels, which would be daft. D8. Ban gambling advertising prior to, during and or after online video games, including when viewing gaming through online streaming platforms. Video games isn't defined in the study of the appendix. D9. Ban gambling operators' ability to target customers who are self-excluded or been identified as being vulnerable to harm with advertisements or marketing materials. The Gambling Commission already make it clear operators shouldn't be advertising self-excluded people. That definition of vulnerable, which I stated earlier, doesn't really exist. That part is ludicrous. D10. Ban influencers and market affiliates from endorsing gambling operators' products and services. Personally, influencer is a word I tend to associate with a moron who's famous for being famous. I state that may not be a workable definition in law. Committee of Advertising Practice has taken action this year to protect under 18s and ill-defined vulnerable groups, and Betting Gaming Council support for changes. Sports personalities will be banned from appearing in gambling adverts. I actually think this is a good idea. I did find it disturbing finding the likes of Peter Crouch and Jeff Stelling, for example, in betting ads, as I think they have an influence. Paul Merson has condemned very strongly sports personalities appearing in gambling adverts. Guardian stated the new rules as an ad will be banned if it is likely to be of strong appeal to children or young persons, especially by referencing or being associated with youth culture. That is well and good, but it isn't the same as the time banning them, which the authors want. How on earth will that be enforced? How are you going to stop someone high profile on YouTube or other media outlets from endorsing a company? Are you going to outbid Elon Musk for Twitter? D11. Ban gambling operators from endorsing and sponsoring professional and community sports teams, players, athletes and sports activities. The question according to the report, one of the appendix, is ban sports sponsorship of players or athletes by operators. This is a massive difference. The question in the report probably won't help self-employed sports people. He asked a question which is asked in the appendix. It's hugely over the top and frankly ridiculous. D12. Require the disclosure of all payments and gifts for product endorsement by those giving, i.e. gambling operators, and those receiving, i.e. influence and market affiliates. Do you want this for every product in the country? And I don't just mean gambling. Never mind that having a law demanding it may make public how much someone is paid for an advert is ludicrous. D13. Restrict marketing and advertising gambling operators and products by proximity to locations used by those vulnerable to gambling related harm, i.e. distance from a school. This is a simplistic answer. Schools can be located near to city centres, and I gave out a clear definition of vulnerable. That part is desk work. The version of the main report only contains the useless part. Restrict product advertising with proximity to locations used by vulnerable individuals. D15. Ban the broadcast or streaming of live gambling competitions. This is where Paul knowledge and research from the office comes in. I wonder if poker was covered by the 2005 Gambling Act. And after checking, it is under Section 8 Equal Chance Gaming. Poker itself isn't specifically mentioned in the Act, but the Gambling Commission makes it clear that Equal Chance Gaming includes poker. So if poker seems less common than it was, you still access competitions to watch online. Banning it being broadcasted so silly as to be daft. E1. Gambling products to have pre-commitments options to set time and spending limits. Again, a solely Australian phrase is used. In reality, this isn't banned unless it's optional and not mandatory. E2 ban all simulated gambling and gambling contests in video games. I repeat my statement about starters orders, but wanting to ban even simulated gambling content goes to a new level of insanity, especially as poker games without any actual money involved would be banned. E3 ban automatic teller machines, ATMs, cash points being located within gambling premises. I can see a logic to this actually, but again, because we've still studied to find so little, it could ban an ATM at a racecourse. E4 ban banknote receptors and EGMs. Of odd thing to suggest it's easy using customer account and keeping track of your spending. E5 ban bonus play features on EGMs and online games. Again, this could have some merit. E6 ban customer abilities to bet simultaneously on multiple gambling operators' websites. Again, you need a central database with problems I mentioned earlier. E7 ban discounted or complimentary alcohol being offered to customers land-based gambling venues. That could wreck hospitality. Again, because the venue isn't defined, it could mean racecourses. E9 ban the sale or consumption of alcohol at land-based gambling venues. As Lee said to the doctor when he explained how the dimensions of the TARDIS works, that's silly. E10 ban the use of all technological designs of EGMs to have the effect of misdirection to promote and sustain gambling. What are you talking about, Willis? As you can guess, I'm finding it increasingly difficult to take any of this seriously. There's no justification why this is a question. I don't know what it means. I expect the authors that know even less about it, as they don't mention it again at any point. E12 mandate all new gambling products to be independently assessed as to they do not facilitate excessive gambling. What every single time? There's a new better product. It's not a bloody car that needs rigorous assessment. E19 video games any gambling content to have a minimum 18 age restriction. Again, lacking definition of video games is a problem. E20 requiring gambling operators to enable independent researchers to access gambling environments and related data for proof studies. How does this work? Will there be people taking notes in a bookmakers, casinos, bingo hall and arcades? Are they going to be allowed to watch someone's account online? F1 ban the gambling industry from funding, creating or disseminating health-related information or delivering reduction and prevention interventions. Why is it right we don't want the charity GamCare funded? Also, the gambling industry doesn't deliver harm reduction or prevention itself, it just funds them. Frankly, this is an awful and visible suggestion. F4 harm reduction messaging to be displayed clearly and regularly during EGM play and online gambling sessions. As I said earlier, safer gambling should be more prominent, especially on casino sites. However, becoming harassment would be counterproductive. The suggestion in the notes seems almost sensible. Under New Zealand law, electronic gaming machines are required to display pop-up messages which interrupts play at irregular intervals not exceeding 30 minutes of continuous play. These pop-ups must show differential play, the cash amount of the gambler spent and red net wins or losses. Every 30 minutes makes sense. Regular parts drifts into harassment. F5 requires that for each gambling advertisement or television social media, the gambling industry must fund an independent public health message. Betting and Gaming Council pretty much do this for funding the charity GamCare anyway. The charity describes themselves as independent, and if your authors are disputing this, they should take it up with the Charity Commission. It's certainly not true that GamCare is only funded by the Betting and Gaming Council. F7 requirement for prominent and accurate product information to be displayed on each EGM and gambling websites. A cost per spin stroke play, odds of winning, average percentage of stake on each bet, house said operators' gross profits. Some of this is reasonable, but some of it is excessive. F8 standardised design and packaging for gambling products, so no brands, colours, images, corporate logos or trademarks are displayed. This message really tickled the IEA's Christopher Stoughton under its sort of version report of all gambling products are plain packaging. This message is so hilarious as to be approaching parody. Gone on Ladbrokes red, William Hill's blue and Cole's green. What stupid researchers have done is come up with a question based on cigarette package and try to transfer it to gambling. It's as thick a measure as making alcohol plain packaging. I've then looked up plain packaging of alcohol, and unbelievably Public Health England have suggested this in a report in December 2016. Stirling University a few months ago looked at the alcohol packaging issue, which came to the astounding conclusion that its packaging had an effect of getting retention appeal of 18 to 35-year-olds, but like food packaging have the same effect. That's the point of packaging. F9. Reverse and targeted social marketing campaigns and health-related programs that aim to improve understanding of harms, how to use risks, and how to access support for people experiencing gambling-related harm. You mean like GamCare does? Anyway, would this be from the gambling companies who offers want banned from social media? The alternative suggestion of banning them appears to be they only do social marketing campaigns and gambling issues. That's a problem. They wouldn't reach anyone, as no one would follow them if all they did. G1. All gambling operators to require self-excluded customers to demonstrate we have taken appropriate steps to address harms before the account is reinstated. It's a really stupid question, making it more difficult to restart betting and gambling, but people will be less likely to self-exclude. Table 4 in the appendix has the same text G1 mentioned twice. How nobody's noted this before publication is unbelievable. G4 offer free and accessible combined pharmacological and psychosocial interventions to people experiencing gambling disorder, and G5 offer free and accessible pharmacological interventions to people experiencing gambling disorder. Would this be through the NHS? G7 offer information for people experiencing gambling related harm on how to access advice, support and treatment, like it already happens, for example, through GamCare. G8 opportunistic identification, brief advice and onward referral interventions for people at risk of experiencing gambling-related harms. Opportunistic identification means other services like GPs identify someone has a gambling issue. It's certainly not a bad idea, and a better one than many of the authors actually recommend. Presentation by New Zealand's Sean Sullivan of 2006 International Conference of Gambling makes some interesting suggestions along these lines, and I include these in the linked comments. A main report lists this as provide identification, brief advice and onward referral interventions, which removes all the clear meaning. G10, provision of helplines that offer information, help and support to people experiencing gambling-related harm, like what happens, for example, yet again, through GamCare. G11, require that all staff in land-based gambling venues are trained to identify customers who are likely to experience gambling-related harm and how to intervene. Well, enough of this is a debate. However, relevant bodies do state they have trained staff. G13, provision of free gambling blocking software at the point of access. How is this different to C10? Require online gambling operators to offer free online gambling blocking software to customers. A study is an example of a politician's syllogism and is found in Yes Prime Minister. We must do something. This is something, therefore we must do this.